a production of the New Jersey Courts.
So you got there in March of '68. That was just prior to Dr. King's assassination.
That's correct.
Yeah. What was it like being out there at that time?
It was a little scary. If you recall from history, the Black Panther movement was beginning in Oakland, California, out there. In fact, I think it took us about 6 weeks before we had officers' quarters on the base. We rented an apartment in Oakland, and near Black Panther activity. In fact, I'm sure my son, we were acquaintances with some of the individuals. We had no problems, but I would read about things. The Office of Plans, one of the Office of Plans, they would get news reports and clippings that special for the Army about various activities that were going on. So that I knew about. Then unfortunately, April 4th, I'm there maybe a month, and Dr. King is assassinated. That was quite tragic, and everyone was upset, but you still continue to go on and do your duty as an officer. And then Robert Kennedy shortly thereafter. It was just a bad year.
Mm. When you were in plans, what was a typical day like for you?
Well, I mean, you go into the office, you get various reports of activities that are going on. You're always working on a 5-year plan of projection of things that would be going on, what you would be doing, and it was different. We had a terminal there, so Oakland was a part where a lot of supplies, both military people as well as supplies, were coming in and out. It was a staging point for individuals going to Vietnam. So we had them coming and going to Vietnam all the time, marching around the base. But the administrative office, you had your special duty time for the weekends on a rotation basis. But the Office of Plans was a different aspect for me. I didn't do legal work. Even though I was a law school graduate and had abilities in that respect, I did not go into the Judge Advocate Corps because that would have meant 4 years, if you did that. So I was assigned to transportation, and Oakland Army Base, of course, is a transportation base. So that's the various assignments. I was, believe it or not, I was limited in what I could do. During my basic orientation, they discovered that I had a major defect in my spine, which limited some of the things that I could do physically. Could still play sports, do things, but I had what they call a profile, so I was limited in what I could do. Maybe that's one of the reasons I wasn't sent to Vietnam, because of that profile limitation. But in any event, physically I was limited to some of the things that I could do in the Army.
Did that lead to the Special Services
well,
assignment?
No, I'm not sure what led to the Special Services. It was out of my control. Mm-hmm. But my commander of the base, I guess the Special Service officer left, and he knew that I was still involved in sports. I played on the basketball team, and we had a flag football team, so I was involved with sports activities. So I guess he thought it might be a natural thing for me to have that assignment. So I was assigned to the Special Services officer.
Do you know if the base was like a center for anti-war protests?
It was not.
Okay.
It was not. Protests were not, and a lot of things were going on in San Francisco. Oakland, not so much. Although Berkeley was, on one side, San Francisco was on another, but Oakland was pretty calm. It may have gotten more volatile later, but I was there to the end of '69, and that period was not big. Now it was different in San Francisco. There was a lot of peace movements, a lot of hippies, and it was just a town that a lot of activity was going on. It was interesting to me. One of the sidelights of me being assigned to Oakland, California, unbeknownst to me, my college roommate, Mike Brown, had gone to school in California here. He's living in San Francisco now. My best friend from law school, Bob Payson, he lived in San Francisco. He lived in Los Angeles. So I had a good friend in Los Angeles, best friend from college in San Francisco. So we did a lot of things on the West Coast with those friends during the course of my 2-year period there. And it made it a lot easier for me being on the West Coast. And as I said, we had a lot of family that would come out to visit. There was opportunity, a place for them to stay, as well as to have their own personal tour guide of the San Francisco Bay Area.
You said your wife was there. You had your first child there?
Yes. No, my children. I had a boy and a girl then. My first child was born when I was in law school, and my second was born my third year of law school. So I had 2 young children on the Army base. But they had activities for the kids. Right outside of our apartment was a play area. So everything was sort of ideal for our location. One of the nice things about the Army at that time, Travis Air Force Base was not that far away. And you could go up, wait for a military transport, and actually fly to Hawaii for relatively nothing. And we did that at least on one occasion. Had a great experience. I stayed at the Army base in Army bachelor's quarters in Hawaii. Got a chance to view the USS Arizona and a lot of things that are there. I found out through my course of being in the military that the U.S. Army has some of the most valuable land in the United States, both in the San Francisco Bay Area. The Presidio was just a wonderful area. Treasure Island, the Navy and others, and then of course in Honolulu, right there they own property right there on the ocean front. The officers' quarters, you could hear the water outside. On another occasion, we booked and stayed at a area on right on the ocean front. They had these little huts that would be one room, but they have a kitchen facility and bunk beds, and the ocean would be lapping at the front door in the morning, depending upon how far it came in. And it was so quiet that we could only stay there a couple of days, and then we went to other locations. But there are some wonderful property that the U.S. Army owned, and you were able to go to at various times.
Now, to step back, when did you meet your wife?
I met my wife, I guess, when I was in 8th grade. I mentioned that my mother was born in Atlantic City. Her family was living there. I had a number of relatives in Atlantic City. And we would visit Atlantic City from when I was a child all the time. And I guess when I was in 8th grade, during the summer, I had got to have good friends in Atlantic City around my age, or a year younger. And we were on the beach one day, and he said, "Hey, I want you to meet a friend of mine." And I go over, and I get introduced to my wife's family. They were all there at the same time. And my wife is one of 7 children in the family. And I meet the entire family at the same time, and he introduces me to Barbara first. And I said, "She's kind of cute." I'm in 8th grade, just meeting her. And we then leave and go back to what we were doing. But my friend was actually dating a young lady, and his mother was going to take he and his lady friend to a lake the next day. So he invited me, and so I said, well, maybe I'll ask Barbara. I didn't have anybody that I was close to, knew anybody. So his mother called Barbara's mother, and Barbara's mother knew my Aunt Lillian Bryant very well, and Barbara said yes, and so we went on a first date the day after I met her. We went to this lake, I think it was Lake Absegami, not far from Lang City, and there was a diving platform about 30 yards out. So we swim out to the diving platform, and there was a, about this height, 3 or 4 feet off the ground, diving board, and then there was another one about where the ceiling is out there, about 15 feet. So I was a fairly decent swimmer, but I didn't dive. I wasn't a diver, but so I jump off the board, and Barbara gets up and she does a swan dive off the high board. It was quite impressive, and I've been impressed with her ever since. That was our meeting, and then I'd see her off and on during the course of visiting Lang City. Never really went steady, but just we're good friends, and I'd invite her. We had a dance at Pittman. We had a sophomore hop. Invited her up, and her parents let her come up. She stayed at my house, and took her to my proms, and vice versa. I went to one of her proms, several dances in Lang City. So, but yet, we're still dating other people, and then it got serious near the end of my college days, and ended up getting married and going to the law school, and we have now 5 children. We started out with just 2, and then a hiatus of about 7 years, and then we had our middle child, Kimberly. First one was John, then Andrea. Kimberly came along about 7 years after Andrea, and then we had twins 2 years later, Michael and Michelle. So that rounded out the 5 children that I have. Barbara's been very instrumental in my life, very active, always. I was impressed with her early on. She did a lot of things as a high school student as far as leadership things in Lang City. And so when we got married, sometimes she wouldn't even talk to me about them. Like she became president of the PTA, and I find out about it from somebody else. She's always involved with her children. And then she was asked to be on the school board, did that. Later on in life, she was very active in various charitable Girl Scouts, now Special Olympics. When our youngest daughter, our oldest daughter, Andrea, when she decided to go to dance school and do gymnastics, my wife decided to learn all about gymnastics and became a gymnastics judge. So she's been doing that for probably 40 years now. No, but when Barbara gets involved, she does it, makes it her cause.
So you left Oakland in '70 and came back?
Yes, came back. We were looking for a home, and we had, Barbara came back a little earlier than I did, and she started looking, and we looked in the Pennsylvania suburbs and New Jersey, South Jersey area, and ran into some discrimination as far as the housing part of it. We knew some friends who lived in Wedgewood in New Jersey, of Washington Township, Wedgewood section. And we looked around, and we were very lucky in that there was a house that came on the market just when we started looking. A real quick story about the house. The realtor who was trying to sell it apparently had an affair with the homeowner's wife. And that's why they were selling, because they were separating. So the realtor, he was showing us other homes, but then he said, hey, this one just came available. And he knew it came available because he was with the wife. so to speak. And so we grabbed at that opportunity. We were very lucky in that I had saved money from the Army, and as well as we were able to assume the mortgage, meaning we could take up with someone else that started. And at that time, 5% was good. Now it's high. It's tell you how much things have changed. But we were able to assume the mortgage, and it worked well. We bought it was actually a 5-bedroom bi-level with a nice backyard. We've always been fortunate at having a backyard for sports activities, and one of the first things we did, put a basketball stand in the front, and it was a good place to call home.
And was it a diverse neighborhood, or?
It was diverse in that we made it diverse.
Okay.
There were several other families throughout the development, and it became more diverse as the years went by. But when we first moved in, may have been the only African American family on that street, but it changed as the years went by. And it was a newly developed, I guess the people who had our home had only been there for a year.
Now, when you said you ran into problems looking around, was it just that there were areas that you knew that it wouldn't be, don't even bother, or did you?
It was more my wife, so I can't speak directly other than she felt that they wouldn't sell to her because she was an African American. And then she just reported that to me because I was still in Oakland when this was going on. When I returned to we stopped looking in the Philadelphia suburbs, and we're looking in New Jersey, and did not have that problem where we looked.
And were you able to go back to the law firm in Philadelphia?
Yes, I returned to Montgomery Cracken in January of 1968.
Or 1970?
Sorry, 1970, January 1970. Stayed there only 6 months. An opportunity developed that this was the time that the Penn Central Transportation Railroad was going into reorganization. And the counsel for the railroad, the trustee staff, Robert Blanchett, was forming his staff of attorneys. And I was given an opportunity to work with his staff, and left Montgomery Cracken to go with the counsel at the Penn Central Transportation's staff, and did so. And I stayed there about 6 years until 1976. And at that time, a couple of friends of mine and I decided to form our own law firm, and we formed the firm of Atkinson, Myers, Archie, and Wallace. I was the tail end of it.
Well, tell me a little bit about the job with the railroad trustees. What did that entail? What was your?
Well, at that time, unbeknownst to me, Penn Central Transportation Company was a major corporation that owned land throughout the United States, mostly in New York City. Some very valuable land, Madison Square Garden being part of it. And they had many legal problems because they were in reorganization. No one ever thought that the Penn Central Transportation Company was going to be in reorganization, and it was a railroad reorganization. So it was a different type of reorganization. It meant learning different laws. I was in charge of our proof of claim program, where people from all over the country would file claims against a railroad, alleging the railroad owed them money and for different things. You had various assignments that you had to do. Everything you had to be approved by the judge overseeing the reorganization in federal court. Excuse me. So it meant having to be prepared. Bob Blanchett was an outstanding attorney. He had gone to Yale. He had several of his Yale friends that were also on the staff. and it was an interesting experience. I think I was the one Harvard guy, so we had our little back and forth between Harvard and Yale, but it was a good time, and did a lot of different things. Because I said I was involved with the claims, one of the issues that developed was set-offs. Some people, realizing that the railroad owed them money, wouldn't pay the bills for the railroad that were developing during the reorganization. And the code really prohibited that self-help set-off conduct. However, a particular matter where I think it was Gold Seal Liquors had done a set-off type thing, and it had gone up and had been approved through the circuit court. So we got our first opportunity to petition the Supreme Court of the United States, and they granted certification, and so we had a case that went to the Supreme Court. It was a neat experience. Unfortunately, I was still junior on the file. One of the senior attorneys from the Penn Central Transportation staff handled the argument, but it gave me an opportunity to go and appear at the Supreme Court, sit at the table, see how they question and so on. And we were successful on the appeal. They reversed the circuit court, and we received a successful verdict. I think Justice Douglas wrote the opinion.
Do you remember approximately what year that was?
I think it was 1975. Gold Seal Liquors versus Penn Central Transportation Company.
So 76 was when you decided to, with your
yes,
colleagues,
I decided.
start a
one of the attorneys, Nolan Atkinson, and I had studied for the Pennsylvania bar together back in '67, and we had maintained our friendship. And his small three attorney firm had broken up, and he and Jack Myers decided to form another law firm. And so Bob Archie, who had been with Morgan Lewis, and myself, who had been with the Penn Central staff at that time, we got together, talked about it, and decided to form our own firm, and we did so.
Where was the firm based?
I was based in Philadelphia, basically. Let me backtrack a little bit. As I said, in 1970, I moved to New Jersey. Because I resided in New Jersey, after a couple of years, I thought that I should become a member of the bar in New Jersey. So in 1972, I took the New Jersey bar and passed. Because of some of my activities in the town of Washington Township, one of them being the JCs at that time was a viable organization for young men in the town. We had different activities. So I got to know a lot of the people in the town, some of the movers and shakers. And in December of 1972, I was asked to become the municipal court judge in Washington Township. Now, although not, I didn't tout my party affiliation. I was a registered Democrat, but the Republicans were in charge at the time. But they nominated me as the municipal court judge, which was unusual, that they would appoint someone of an opposite party. But these were individuals that were looking to do the best thing for the town, rather as opposed to whatever the party might think is better. So I was appointed the municipal court judge of Washington Township in 1973. That's a 3-year term. I did that for 3 terms. I guess I was reappointed by a Democratic administration, and at some point there was a Democratic administration and I was not reappointed. I think I was in 80 or 81. But it was a wonderful experience. I got to meet attorneys from all over the tri-state and the local southern counties. If you're an attorney, you do a lot of municipal court work generally. If you're in New Jersey, at least in the southern part. So I got to know a lot of attorneys. I was a fair-minded judge, and they knew they were going to get a good shake if they came into the court where I was sitting. And as a result, one of the things that time, the Municipal Court Association would meet with the Superior Court judges on a regular basis. So I got to know the local judges as well as the municipal court judges, local Superior Court judges as municipal court judges. And it was good, and I knew most of the players, so to speak. And the attorneys, some of whom were very active before me, I would see. And then this is going back to the practice of where the offices were. Now that I'm an attorney in New Jersey, I cannot do any criminal work because of the municipal court practice. I can do civil work because that does not, municipal courts don't do civil matters generally, so that's not a conflict. So I had a New Jersey office that I had out of my home. I mentioned if I didn't mention, I had a bi-level home, and one bedroom was downstairs that I used for an office, and it made it easy the way it was configured. So I had a New Jersey practice it was a general practice. I did everything in the civil side, and in the Pennsylvania office, it was another general practice, but I did a fair amount of work with Conrails because I had come from the railroad industry. Conrail had been established by that time, which was a government railroad that would take over for a lot of the Penn Central transportation's responsibilities. So there were a lot of FELA claims, negligence claims for injured employees, and there was so much work that they would give outside counsel work to do. So I did a lot of their work in New Jersey, in the southern part, as well as Pennsylvania. Nolan Atkinson did the primary portion in Pennsylvania. I would do it in New Jersey. So between the two areas, we got to know and meet different people and different corporations, and it enabled our practice to grow.